Let's talk about colour, beginning with some basic ideas about colour mixing. And even though you might be familiar with the subject, you might be interested in my take on it anyway. And after that, I'll share with you a few of my own paintings and talk about how I think of colour in my own work. We probably all experience colour differently, but we can't know that. What we do know is that we certainly have colour preferences. Some people experience colour on an emotional level, some aesthetically, others are fairly indifferent to it. Some artists like to consciously use colour combinations to create a certain aesthetic effect. Others love random, often strong colours, juxtaposed in an exciting way. There are no rules. But understanding how colours affect one another is incredibly helpful in creating images that come alive, even when the tones are very subtle. It also means less mess and confusion on the palette. And again, bear in mind that we do see colours differently. There are millions of people in the world, mostly men, who have suffered so-called colour blindness and, for instance, can't distinguish between colours that contain the red area of the spectrum and even into the yellow area. That is the shorter frequency range. This is not the only type, of course, but in general, men are less aware of subtle colour variations than women due to chromosomal differences, while women generally are very attracted to colours. And this photo is really interesting. You'll see that the napkin on the right, which looks a violet colour, is very different to the one on the left. And given our colour theory idea that if you mix red and blue together, you'll get violet colours, this makes no sense because red colourblind people can't see the red spectrum. So what's this telling us? It's telling us that they do detect the ultraviolet range of the spectrum, that is, the much lower frequencies. They can see those. It has nothing to do with colour theory. The colour chart that we have is an artificial construct because here we have the very high frequency of red and the very low frequency of violet. So it's a convenience for mixing pigments. It has nothing to do with the way light itself functions. I like to make my colours sing, so they create a sense of vibrancy and overall cohesion. But to do that requires an understanding the role of complementaries and how they're not only related to primary and secondary colours, but it goes around the whole spectrum. They're about relative values. And Michel Chevreuil's colour wheel explores those subtler tones. So just to come back to our colour wheel, orange that tends towards the red end of the spectrum, the warm end, will tend to have a cool blue as its complementary, whereas orange towards the cooler end, the yellow end, will tend to have a warm blue as its complementary. Also, placing complementaries adjacent to one another creates an intense vibration, so toning them down can be important and easily achieved as a rule of thumb by adding a little of each to its opposite. For instance, adding blue to orange tones it down, and the more blue that's added, the less pure and intense the orange will be, and also a little cooler in tone, and vice versa. If you add a touch of orange to blue, that tones it down. So you'll still have the vibration between the two, but it's less intense. And when it comes to shadow areas, it's a really useful thing to know because the complement of a light colour is great for creating shadows on the object. Just bearing in mind that the shadow cast on the background is going to be affected by the colour of the background. And it might have a little bit of shade or a bit of reflection of the object's colour, but it will mostly be defined by the background itself. So it's quite fun to play with all this. It's a great exercise for a new artist just to play around with complementary colours, two pigments and nothing else. There are many theories about colour. Some even regard green as a primary colour. And the three colours used in printing are magenta, cyan and yellow. No pure red. But for artists, The colour wheel is a convenient way of describing the relationships, and they generally follow along the lines of this one we have here, in which the secondary colours are seen as complementary to what we regard as pure colours, red, blue and yellow. But in fact, if the wheel is created in such a way that the relative wavelengths are taken into account, we have a very different picture, because when we do that, the complementary of pure red is more of a blue colour. It's not actually green. So it is a complicated subject. And if you do that, the complementary of yellow still remains purple or violet. When it actually comes to paint pigments, though, it becomes quite complicated, especially when it comes to the reds, because the opacity or transparency of each pigment affects its mixing quality, and most colours available at art suppliers are a mixture of different pigments. The most commonly used of what we might call pure reds are probably vermilion and cadmium red. And the problem with cadmium red is that it's very opaque and therefore not a good mixing pigment with blues, although it works well with yellows. Strangely, cadmium yellow is also opaque, but it does mix well with both reds and blues. Not always true, but when in doubt, choose transparent or semi-transparent colours and not cad red for mixing. How do you know which is which? It's on the label. So let's get down to several practical basic rules. They're not definitive, but they work for me. The first is that the fewer pigments used, the better overall cohesion of the image, unless you like chaos, which many do, and that's their legitimate choice. As I said earlier, we all perceive things differently. The second is that if you wish to use specific colours which you're unable to mix, then of course you add them to your palette and mix them by all means, preferably only with one other carefully chosen colour. And the third is, if you wish to create purple or violet, use a cool red and a warm blue, or again simply purchase a ready-made colour if you need a specific tone. My cabinet is full of gorgeous colours that I bought on a whim because I like them, never use them. The third is to create vibrant greens, then mix a cool yellow with a cool blue and add a variety of reds, including ochres, to create many different hues. But in reality, any mixture of yellows and blues creates green. It's just more vibrant if you use those clear colours. A good rule of thumb for a new palette is to begin with a warm and cool version of each colour. My own basic palette is lemon for a cool yellow, cadmium for a warm yellow, cobalt as a cool blue, ultramarine as a warm blue, alizarin crimson as a cool red, and then one of the red oxides or ochres, such as light red, for warmth, because I actually never use cadmium red. I also use yellow ochre and raw sienna because we are all influenced by the physical environment we grow up, and mine is Australia, most of which consists of red earth and many shades of ochre, as well as the grey-green of the ubiquitous eucalyptus trees and shrubs. In fact, my favourite Australian artist, the late Fred Williams, made his name painting the colours of the Australian landscape in a very unique way. Playing with colour means just that, playing, not expecting an outcome and being prepared to waste some materials and time to explore and play. I'm going to share with you a painting of mine, one of a series I created playing with only 2 pigments and white. And the results are fairly interesting because I haven't used a traditional colour palette at all. The pigments were Australian red gold and perylene black, which is an artificial pigment. The colour swatches placed against the colour wheel indicate they are complementaries. What's interesting about them is that they're both coolish in tone, so you'd expect the painting to be cool and unbalanced, but that isn't quite the case. The red gold is a mixture of cool reds, quinacridone magenta, quinacridone violet, transparent red oxide, and Indian yellow, which are all transparent and cause it to be quite vibrant, especially in watercolour. Perylene black is really interesting because when it's toned down by white, it becomes a cool green. And with enough white, it begins to look like a pale blue. So the eye detects the full spectrum of reds, yellows, and blues with these two pigments, which is really an illusion. The colours on your screen aren't quite exact and I couldn't adjust them, but you get the idea. And this is one of the paintings I created just for these two colours and white. It's called Yggdrasil, which is Norse for tree of life. You can see how vibrant the orange is. It looks almost red, but not quite. And the blue looks almost blue, but not quite. And if you look at a close-up of this area here, and then this area here, you'll see the enormous variety of tones you can get when you use them. You can see here we have this almost blue colour. It's still a little bit greenish at this tone, but the red is really quite intense. And if we go to the other section, you see that the red gold, when watered down with white, becomes quite yellowish. It looks like a yellow. There's just a hint of the pure version here. But this is the interesting bit. When you mix the gold with the green, you actually get quite a deep, quite luscious green here actually. And then over here we get rusty brown colours. So the eye sees, if you start mixing the colours and then mixing them with white, you really create a painting that is totally harmonious because all of the pigments are contained throughout the whole canvas. It's really quite an interesting effect. I did a few other paintings with the same technique. I won't go into them, just so you can see you can do a more conventional painting. This looks very dramatic with the red sky and the cool area in front, which pushes the whole image back. I have said in past videos, if you put a dark or cool area at the bottom of the canvas, it tends to push everything backwards into the canvas. And that's what's happening here. And the yellow behind the cement works gives a feeling of space and depth in the sky. Here's another one. This is a graffiti wall. It's 1.8 metres wide by 1.20 metres, as I recall. Again, a whole huge painting just with those two pigments. The next and last four images are indeed a bit more serious because they were painted for an exhibition. But I have books full of drawings and I decided to convert some of them into paintings, which was an interesting exercise because I had to decide what my colour theme would be based on the images themselves. And in this one you can see I've still held on to the games I was playing with the duotones, I call them, the Australian red gold and the Pyroline black. So I decided that the beak and the claws of the eagle were to be the dominant parts of the painting because that's all. It's all about the power of this amazing creature. So of course I painted them not in Australian red gold, but in fact in a pure orange, quite opaque paint. But you can see in the background, all around here and up into the foliage here and around here, that I've come back to the duochrome theme. Having decided on the orange and the green, the Pyroline black, the other colours then sort of fitted into place. I've gone here into a warmer red just to warm the painting up a bit. And the foliage is a green. It's a complement to this. So we have the orange and its complement of the really, really cool green, almost blue. And then we have the alizarin crimson here with its complement of greens. So it still holds together in a fairly harmonious way. In a second one, again, I had to decide which was going to be the dominant part of the painting because that needed to be the most powerful and impressive colours. Of course, it was these spherical shapes, which I painted in one of my favourite colours, which is light red. And again, there's the complement of the red is the leaves, which are in reality a little bit more green looking than this. They look quite yellow here, but they are really a green. And then in the drawing, this strange little thing here became a bunch of grapes. So I've got the violet here, the violet repeated down here and down here. Rhythmic unity, it's called, when you keep carrying colours through. And of course, the complement of violet is yellow, so hence there's quite a lot of yellow in the leaves, which is complementing this and creating a fairly intense effect. In this one, again, I've gone for my ochres. I mentioned earlier that I have a love of ochres that comes from my home country. We have light red here. We have raw sienna, which is just a beautiful yellow for me. We have the complement. We've got the pyroline black yet again being carried through. We have the violets here next to the greens. So we've got, next to the yellows of the leaves and next to the raw sienna, which is in fact a yellowish colour. So it's full of complementary colours, and as you can see, it makes it quite vibrant. And then in the fourth and last, again, looking at complementary colours. I don't know what was the dominant part of this one. It was quite difficult to tell. So, but I did pull the feather forward by making it yellows and mauves, so that it gives the painting more depth, having these light colours that catch the light. And also these light areas here tend to come forward just because they're firstly contrasted with a dark background, and secondly they catch the light, as does this area of the nautilus shape. Again, my favourite light red, it seems to be in all my paintings, and the mauves complementing the yellows. Here's the mauve up here complementing the raw sienna of this spiral shape here. And we have this lovely, now this green is, I mentioned earlier, mixing a transparent yellow with a transparent blue, and there's no other colour in it. And here it is here, this delicious limey green, which goes beautifully with light red. And then down here, we have more towards the Australian red gold. In fact, I think I did actually use Australian red gold here with the pyroline black. So I've kept that theme that I discovered doing the duochromes. I've kept that theme going in other paintings as I've continued on. So it was a really worthwhile experiment. So that's that little story. I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. I hope to see you next time.